Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, one of the civic partners for our show. Today, my guest is Shoshana Hershkowitz. She is the campaign manager for the Empire State Campaign for Childcare and at the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy. Shoshana, welcome to North Country Matters. I'm glad to have you as a guest today to talk about how childcare fared in the 2024 New York State budget, the status of childcare as it stands right now, and where we need to go from here during the remaining weeks of the legislative session.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So first of all, I want to ask you a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved in the campaign. You are no stranger to the North Country, are you?
No, I got both my undergraduate and graduate degrees at Potsdam. I am a Crane graduate, and I was a public school teacher, public school music teacher for 10 years before I had children. And part of why I didn't return to the full-time workforce was the cost and the stress of childcare after I had my first child. And instead went the route that I think a lot of people do, which is, taking part-time work, just a patchwork of jobs and then staying home with my kids. And when I came back to the full-time workforce, it ultimately was in the advocacy space. And at my previous job, we were a coalition partner of the Empire State Campaign for Childcare and then I found myself in this role managing the campaign. So it's been an interesting and circuitous route, but that, started in the North Country, but here we are.
So often, though, what you talk about is exactly what happens is that the dynamic changes once kids come along, and your frustration and difficulty with childcare is certainly a very, very common story, not just in New York State, but all across this country. And so, and the fact that you have gone into advocacy is really good for the campaign because you know what you're talking about. You've walked a mile in those shoes.
Yeah, it's, I think it hits, I'm here on Long Island, but I think across the state and like you said, across the country, it doesn't matter where you are. This is an issue for parents of all, localities, all income levels. Everyone is struggling with this cost.
Yes, that's very true. So explain to us a little bit about what the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy is and how it came to be involved in the Empire State Campaign for Childcare.
Okay, so Schuyler is a 151 or 152-year-old organization that was founded by the great-granddaughter of Alexander Hamilton and Elizabeth Schuyler, really centering on advocacy for low-income children and families. And it has, continued in that tradition. Some of the issues that we work on are child welfare. It is also home to the Medicaid Matters campaign, to child poverty study, to dental and oral health for low-income New Yorkers, as well as maternal and mental health. And it does a lot of really, really good work around advocacy and policy for low-income New Yorkers, for their children, for children and families. And the Empire State Campaign for Childcare came about in 2017 and was part of, a group of organizations that were fighting against proposed cuts at the time to childcare under then Governor Cuomo, and was part of like an earlier coalition called Winning Beginning that was focused on 0 to 8 issues. This one really focuses on the early childhood space. And has been around for 7 years. We've had some really, really good wins as far as the expansion of eligibility for childcare assistance, but we still have a lot of work to do, particularly in making sure that the workforce, the childcare workforce, has the compensation that they deserve.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And as you say, it is certainly an issue that we face all across the state, whether you're from the city, you're from the suburbs, or you're in rural New York. It's a huge and universal problem. So let's talk a little bit, Shoshana, about how volatile life has been for childcare providers and parents needing childcare in the last few years. The COVID pandemic created an even greater crisis in a field that was already pretty troubled, wasn't it? Like so much of the care industry, whether it's child, elderly, or the disabled, COVID exposed all the weaknesses in the systems, and when the economy began to shut down, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw that the care economy, we kept hearing about essential workers and how important they were. And obviously that was proven. But I think, if we truly value these essential workers, which the care economy is, then we have to not only value them when we're in a state of emergency, we have to be able to value them at all points, because care is a constant throughout life, not just in our darkest and scariest moments, but in every moment. And I think that, right now we saw these temporary bits of assistance from the federal government that are now ending, but that sustained investment is what's needed, not emergency dollars.
That's right. And in fact, one of the things that we saw was that even the emergency dollars couldn't keep things going, could they? Because there just were too many other pressures on the system. So the recently passed New York State budget failed to make the kinds of systemic changes that we need to create a universal, sustainable childcare system in New York. What are some of the key goals that your campaign had this year going into the budget process?
So our biggest one was setting up a permanent workforce compensation fund. Because childcare workers are paid less than 96% of New York State's workforce. They make on average $33,000 a year, which is not a living wage anywhere. And what we wanted to do was create this fund that had $1.2 billion in it that would give each child care worker in New York State just a necessary supplement to these poverty wages. And we wanted that to be a sustained investment, particularly with the end of the COVID money coming, which was a lifeline at the time, but again, was not a permanent investment. And we were seeking permanence. And what wound up happening was far short of that. The governor's executive budget proposed using up the remainder of the COVID money, so $280 million, for which is less than last year. So in essence, a cut at a time when people are really struggling in childcare, the capacity of the workforce is down. And we were saying that this permanent investment would show that this is a career path you can go into and stay into. So it would be a means of both recruitment and retainment in this field. And the Senate and Assembly in their one House budgets proposed an additional $220 million to make this $500 million. Again, still far short of what we had asked for, but we felt that if this was a permanent investment, it was an important step. And in the end, they wound up with only what the governor proposed in her executive budget, $280 million. And again, this is far less than what's needed, and it's not permanent. So this was a real setback to an already struggling field.
Yeah, and it's important to point out that that 270 million was actually leftover federal money.
Yep.
It represents money that no one had to find for the budget. It was already there. It just hadn't been spent yet. So
Yeah.
that really showcases how much of a moral failure for childcare this budget was, because there was no real new money. And you and I both know that without childcare, New York can't work. People
Absolutely.
absolutely they need childcare in order to be able to work, and without it, the economy just can't be sustainable, can it?
No, and I think like what's happened is that they have put dollars towards expanding eligibility. So like now there are many, many, many tens of thousands more families who are eligible for child care assistance, but they can't find a place because the workforce is at, I remember Kate Ryan from Birth to Three, the Adirondack organization, saying that since 2019, capacity in the Adirondacks has gone down 30%. So if you're newly eligible, but you can't find a place for your child because there's simply no classroom open because there's not someone to staff it, then what good is eligibility? You have to make the same type of investment in the workforce. And this budget just absolutely failed to do so. And this is, I think, going to compound the crisis.
Oh, it is. And I can tell you from St. Lawrence County's point of view, because I sit on the Child Care Council, that we have 790 school-age childcare slots that cannot be filled because there's no one to do the work. And that
Yeah.
is that is an ongoing crisis. And again, it's not anything that has anything to do with geography, because that crisis is spread all across the state. So, Shoshana, let's talk a little bit about the challenges that face childcare providers that still need to be addressed in New York. Whether or not anybody finds money for it, these problems have not gone away, and they're not going to, are they?
No, no. And I think, the biggest thing is the poverty wages. You cannot make a living anywhere in this state on $33,000 a year, which means you are either taking a second job or relying, on public assistance in some way. And this is, I think, you mentioned just the care economy in general. And I think that this is just a problem that is pervasive from childcare through elder care. You have people that are doing really taxing work over very long hours. I don't, that is not an 9 to 5 job by any means. And they're just not being close to adequately compensated. And
That is certainly
I
true.
don't know how you continue to do this work without being able to, care for yourself and your own family.
As we have said before on this program with other guests, people do this work because they love it, but it doesn't mean that they can feed their families on this kind of work. And it's not fair to not compensate people, and particularly in the early childhood field, we know that that birth to 5, when they actually get ready to enter school, are some of the most critical times for brain development and the kind of stimulation that little children need in order to be able to thrive in the school environment. And if we shortchange that period, we are going to compound the problems all through their academic careers, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, everyone says, all of the early childhood development experts talk about that brain development in this, birth to 3 time frame. And, when I think about that time home when I was home with my kids, every single moment is a teachable moment, from like getting, playing with toys, changing their clothes, feeding them. Everything is a moment of learning for kids at that age. And if they don't have consistent high quality care, then it really does impact them, and then that does impact them going forward. I think that those early years are incredibly important to how they develop and to the socialization skills. I think that so often we think about the start of school being, pre-K or kindergarten, but learning begins from those very first moments. And I think that we do not invest enough time and money and effort in making sure that we deliver for our youngest New Yorkers,
Yeah, yeah,
and in turn deliver for the people who care for them and teach them.
you're exactly right about that. So just last week, the New York State Child Care Availability Task Force released a report. Sadly, the report came out after the close of the budget session, but there are some things in that we can use as a blueprint for moving forward. What were some of the key recommendations that your campaign thought were important from your perspective?
Honestly, their top priority was that permanent investment in the workforce, this so that we could recruit and retain people in this field. And that was the top line item. And I so wish that that report had been released when it was finished, which was before the budget. Um, and sadly, and I don't know, I can't speak to the timing of it, but the fact that it came out after that budget was passed and completely shortchanged the workforce was very, very upsetting, particularly to the people who, who spent a lot of time and effort putting that report together with the key goal of having it released before the budget. And again, that workforce was our top line priority because we're incredibly proud of the expansions of availability that were made for families across New York. But without that workforce, that we can't realize that promise.
That's right. And even the expanding eligibility, there are still a number of hoops that families have to go through to actually qualify for that money. So it isn't easy. None of this is
No,
easy. And so you go to the trouble of qualifying and then you can't find a slot because there are no workers in any of the daycare. And certainly a great portion of New York is what we call a childcare desert. That's certainly true. There's only a couple of three communities up here in St. Lawrence County that actually have enough childcare slots to even start to meet the need, but most communities are childcare deserts. There is no one.
yeah. And I think even just here on Long Island, when I look at some of, like the parent discussion boards and, people are talking, and these are not people who are waiting on assistance. These are people who are paying, full price, and they're on wait lists for 6 months,
Right, right.
and saying, well, how do I cover care, for my toddler until I can, get off of this waiting list? And this is just, it is a problem across all of the state, across all demographics. And I feel that when a problem is this pervasive, it is the government's obligation to its people to step in and create a solution. And they really, really failed on that front with
And
this
it
budget.
isn't what you're talking about is what just about every other first world nation does automatically, and we
Yeah,
don't. And it really does create problems up and down the line. Childcare is seen as a family problem, but really it's society's problem. And that's where we
absolutely.
need to get our legislators and our leaders to recognize that and to say, if we solve this problem, we're going to be able to expand the economy and create the kind of job market that we want. I remember talking to a county legislator who has a small business, and he said, I hired a great person who left at the end of the week because she couldn't find daycare.
Yeah.
So, these are people who are employers who are frustrated by this system as well because they know they can't get the kind of people they want to hire because those people can't find childcare.
And,
So,
I think that it ties into the fact that we view just family issues in general as something that is a private burden that is separate, as if you can, separate who you are out, when you go to work, and like as if you could sever those two things. But, when you don't provide adequate leave for family, whether it's paid leave, sick leave, parental leave, and then childcare is huge of a financial burden as it is, it can cost more than a year of SUNY, that it's just not sustainable to have a thriving workforce when families have to struggle this way, and when the people who provide that care can't make a living wage. It's just such a deeply broken system that really shows that we're not prioritizing the right things.
no, and I believe it's 54% of childcare workers are actually on county roles for some sort of assistance because of their low wages. So it actually costs us. It
Yeah.
costs us as a government because we don't have a proper system in place. So there's a little bit of time left in this legislative session before our electeds, who are in Albany right now, head home so they can run for office again. And so, what are the legislative priorities for the next few weeks that your campaign has? And more importantly, how can citizens help?
Okay, so we're going to be actually in Albany on May 7th to talk about our end of session priorities. And one of them, if you've followed the child care campaign, should be familiar to you. And it is our decoupling bill, is what we call it, where we are no longer, we're asking that child care assistance not be tied strictly to the parents' work hours. Because right now, you drop your child off, you have your 30 minutes to get to work, you have 30 minutes after to get back. But things like, if you need a doctor's appointment, or, if you have one child sick at home, but you need the other one to go to care, or if you work fluctuating hours, these are the things that are falling through the cracks of this practice. And we passed this bill twice, and the governor vetoed it this past year, saying there was a financial cost to it. So we asked that be included in the budget. It was not included in the budget. So we're going to ask again, and we're going to keep asking because we know that thousands of families are being impacted by this very just restrictive practice. That is one thing. We're also looking at passing presumptive eligibility because right now there is, when you apply for child care assistance, there's this waiting period of, going through the hoops that you've talked about. And in the meantime, you can't access care. So what we're asking is that people can be presumed eligible so that they can, if they find the job and they find the care, they can get moving. They're not waiting. And those are two of our biggest priorities. We're also looking at a study to determine what is the true cost of care, because we know that child care educators are not being paid that true cost of care. So we're talking about like a cost estimation model. So these are the things we're talking about. And if you follow our social media accounts, we'll be putting out calls to action, whether that is signing on letters, whether it's calling your lawmakers over the next few weeks, asking them to support these measures in our post-budget, our last few weeks of the legislative session. And certainly when they come home, it is worth speaking to them about these issues. If you're meeting with them at a town hall or you're seeing them out at, an event saying, this is something that really matters to me. How are you helping to make, New York more affordable for families? And how are you paying the workforce who cares for our youngest New Yorkers? And making sure that your legislators are standing by, both the workforce and the parents, because it's a symbiotic relationship. You cannot have one without the other.
That's for sure. And those are good goals, and particularly in the decoupling bill, both the Senate and the Assembly have supported it 2 years in a row. So it's not like you have to go back and convince them this is a good idea. It just needs to get done, doesn't it?
Yeah, we need the governor to sign it,
That's right.
and we need it in, we needed it included in this year's budget after she vetoed it, and all of these things have unfortunately not come to be. So we have to continue to fight this fight.
So let's take a second here, Shoshana, to talk about the Rural Caucus of the Empire State Campaign for Childcare. This is a group that meets periodically to discuss the rural childcare providers in particular. How does it work and how can people join this effort?
So we have met, like you said, periodically. They have been involved. The Rural Caucus had a good showing at our advocacy day in Albany, where they spoke with legislators from the North Country about this importance of the workforce. And I will say that I think that you have helped to create some legislative champions. We know that Assembly Member Billy Jones stood with us. So I think that, when people from rural areas come and speak to these issues with their legislators, you help to change the conversation, because I think that so often people think of this, as an urban issue or a suburban issue or a downstate issue, but this is a New York State issue. And we have folks from every corner of the state speaking up on these issues. It helps to change the conversation, and it helps to change who is having the conversation behind closed doors, when they're in their legislative meetings. And I think that, you've helped make Assembly Member Jones, an important member of that conversation.
Yes, I agree. And one of the big problems in New York State is how the budget is done. It always ends up to be three people who are making the decisions behind closed doors. It is anything but a transparent process. And certainly in terms of the care economy this year, it was a disappointment all across the board. And so we
Yeah.
need to shed some light on these issues, and we need to shed some light on the process. So Shoshana, as we come to a conclusion here, give us your final thoughts on this and what you would like folks to be able to take away from this conversation and be able to take some action on.
So I would say certainly, you can check us out at empirestatechildcare.org, and you can join our mailing list that you can be updated on what we're doing and how you can get involved. And the big thing I would say is, as discouraging as it is, and I think it is really discouraging at times to do this work and to keep, to advocate and to tell your story and to not get what we deserve as, as a state. We can't give up on this process, because I think that, there's too much at stake for our families, for our childcare providers, for the well-being of New York. We talk about affordability all the time. And, I think that with good reason, the housing crisis was highlighted this year. Childcare, much like housing and college tuition and gas prices and food prices, childcare is an affordability issue. And it is one of the biggest budget items for families in this state. So as tough as this fight can be at times, it's really, really important that we don't walk away from it, because we don't want our kids to be fighting this battle when they have kids. We want them to, inherit a better care system than the one we're living in. And that's going to be on us to fix.
You are exactly right about not having to fight the battle another time, and it would be nice to get it done this year. And I think with legislators going to be in their home districts for campaigning this summer, this is a great topic to be bringing up, and they really need to hear from the home folks about what
Yeah.
the issues are, and that whoever goes to Albany next January had better come in ready to work on making sure that New York families can afford to live here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Shoshana, thank you for not only for your advocacy, but for your time today to describe this problem for us and to give us the insight that you have given us and our marching orders. So
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure, and I love Potsdam in spring, so I'll have to make a visit up there.
yeah, you should. And spring has pretty much sprung up here. The leaves are coming out on the trees, and so we are hoping for a nice, warm spring. And so, thanks again, Shona, for coming in today and for talking with us. And I hope that the next time that we have one of these conversations, it'll be to celebrate a lot of victories.
Amen to that.
Okay, thanks again. So
Thank you.
these conversations are a production of North Country Matters. This show is a civic collaboration between the League of Women Voters of St. Lawrence County and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters.